From Ed Smith Stadium in Sarasota, Florida, it is the Banner Baseball Live Show. Paul Mancano and Danielle Allentuck. Danielle, we are several days into spring training. We had some rain yesterday. Not a fun day here yesterday. Just a bunch of rain, bunch of nothing. Today, it is gorgeous. I know that's probably tough to hear for a lot of the people back up north, but it is sunny and 63 degrees right now in Sarasota. A perfect day for spring baseball.
Perfect day for baseball.
Yeah, and games have not started yet. They will not start for 5 more days, but we have plenty to discuss here on this show. We've gotten a look at some of the Orioles' new players. We're going to talk about Corbin Burnes and his work with his battery mate, Adley Rutschman. We're going to talk about the live BP that we saw on the field today that included Jackson Holliday. But first, Danielle, let's talk about some interesting rotation options for this Orioles team, because we got Andy Koska's thoughts on it the other day, but you have the injuries that are affecting the rotation. Obviously, Kyle Bradish out with that UCL sprain currently. They want him back in 2024. They expect him to be back in 2024, but he will start the year on the injured list. And then you've got John Means, not a new injury, but he's just a month behind everything. So those are 2 open spots in the rotation. Is there any chance anybody other than Tyler Wells and Cole Irvin will fill those spots?
You know, I don't think so. I mean, I think they are very much their spots to lose at this point. It opens up a lot of bullpen competition, which we can get into later. But I think Cole Irvin and Tyler Wells, they're the best options right now. Brandon Hyde was asked today about 2 prospects, Chase McDermott and Cade Povich, wondering if maybe they would have a chance to step up now. And Hyde was pretty clear that he wants them to go back to AAA, continue their development, and be called up as starters when it's their time, which does not seem like it is going to be now.
Right.
So I think it is definitely Cole Irvin and Tyler Wells. You can very much, erasable pen, put them on the opening day roster.
Yeah, those 2 in McDermott and Povich. McDermott, the righty, Povich, the lefty. Both of them finished the year at AAA. They both came over in the trade deadline a year ago. So they both kind of have followed a similar path to varying levels of success. I know Povich's ERA was a lot higher than McDermott's ERA last year. But those 2, I think maybe down the line, we'll look at those 2 as potential starters for the Orioles in the future. But, it's always a question of, do you want to try to put this guy in a position where he could be in the bullpen later on in the season, or do you want to keep him as a starter? And so if they're keeping them as starters, they're blocked right now behind Wells and behind Irvin. And then when, eventually Bradish and Means come back, those guys will fill out the rotation. So maybe in a year or 2, we're talking about those guys in the rotation. But until the Orioles make that switch for them to be put in, later game situations, I think that they're going to stick as starters for right now. And the tough part is they can't really crack the rotation.
Right. And I wouldn't rule out a late season call up as a reliever. I mean, if Tyler Wells and Cole Irvin are going to be in your rotation, you're going to kind of need that starter-like guy in the bullpen to be able to do long relief role for you.
Right.
They could be that role later on, depending on how the bullpen shakes out this year, how the rotation shakes out. We still don't know for sure how long Bradish is going to be out for, so that raises a lot of questions too. But I would definitely say 2 to 3 years down the line for those 2.
Yeah, and like similar to what we saw with DL Hall last year, where they still said they viewed him as a starter long term, but then we got into the closer to the playoffs, and the Orioles switched him back to the bullpen, and it worked very well. And certainly Chase McDermott and Cade Povich, especially as a lefty with great strikeout stuff, he could be a weapon maybe for this team if they're making a playoff push at some point. But for right now, they're probably on the outside looking in, and we'll probably, like you said, go back to AAA. In terms of the ace of this rotation, we have gotten a chance now to watch Corbin Burnes pitch. We saw him throw a couple bullpen sides. He pitched to both Adley Rutschman catching and James McCann catching. And then we got to see him face several of the Orioles starters in live BP at the backfields here at Sarasota. So we saw him face Cedric Mullins. So we got righty on lefty matchup. We saw him face Ryan Mountcastle. We saw him face Adley Rutschman. And it's not just the media that is stopping everything to watch Corbin Burnes. The crowd around him every single time he takes the mound is amazing.
When he did his live BP, what was that, 2 days ago? Everybody, all the players stopped what they were doing and came over. I mean, there was Colton Cowser and, all the top prospects lining up to watch the new ace and kind of see what he could do. And this was from one of his first bullpen sessions. I think what was really cool for us to watch during this bullpen session was him starting to get to know Adley Rutschman really well. He threw a couple pitches, and then they started talking about, pitch placement and where he wanted to line up and where on the plate he wants to throw. And they had long discussions about it, because that is a big part. What this early part of spring training is the catcher and pitcher getting to know each other and making sure they're on the same page, because they've never worked together before. They barely even knew each other before a couple of days ago.
Yeah, and both catchers. I mean, Corbin Burnes is going to have to at some point. He'll probably be caught by both Adley and by McCann, and so getting that kind of work. And in the video you can see immediately after the bullpens, they go right, and Corbin is pointing at the spots on the plate that he. And for such a smart catcher like Adley Rutschman, this kind of work of them getting it done this week of spring training, you're hoping it's going to pay dividends. Maybe the relationship isn't 100% rock solid to start the year, but you hope by the end of the year they're not even needing to disagree about pitch calls, that they're on the same page.
Right. And I talked to both catchers about these kind of early moments. Adley was saying, you can talk all you want, but you never know what's going to happen until you're into a game. The goal is to have everything talked out, so when you get in a game, it's just kind of like telecommunication. Like, you don't even have to argue. You just kind of know what each other are thinking in that moment. And James McCann was saying, very interestingly, is that for him, it's getting to know the pitcher's personality. He needs to know, what pitcher does he have to go to the mound and be like, you're sucking, do better. His words, not mine. Yeah. And what pitcher do you have to go up and be like, hey, it's going to be okay. Like, everything's going to get better. Just throw the pitch here. That's a big part of spring training too.
It's going to be a fun pairing to watch throughout spring training. And then as we get into the regular season, it is truly awesome to see the Orioles have an ace of Corbin Burnes' caliber. Certainly a pitcher that, of the caliber the Orioles haven't had in a long, long time. So that's going to be fun to watch. In terms of the bullpen competition, we mentioned how those AAA starters are probably on the outside looking in. But when you're putting Tyler Wells and Cole Irvin back into the rotation, that creates a void. You had a story on the BaltimoreBanner.com this morning where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months about Wandisson Charles, maybe a name that Orioles fans aren't too familiar with, but somebody that they should keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, he was kind of an underrated minor league free agent signing a year ago. And he came into Orioles camp last year, and in his words, he was really out of sorts. He had missed all of 2020 with the pandemic, 21 due to some injuries, and 22 was just a really bad year for him. There's no other way to describe it. The Orioles, so he is the type of guy who has really high upside, triple-digit fastball, a chance to be really good, kind of like, think of like Batista when he came to Orioles camp. He can throw hard, he can throw gas, but he couldn't control it all. And Charles was kind of the same way, where they just needed to figure out, okay, what do we need to change in your mechanics and in your training to get you here? So he comes into spring training last year, doesn't make the team, doesn't even get sent out to an affiliate to start the year. He goes on to their development track, and he spent another month here in Sarasota kind of breaking down everything.
Similar to how when DL Hogg went back down to Sarasota in the middle of the year last year.
Right. So it was mechanics, it was mindset, it was everything, even plyometrics, which he had never done in the A's organization, which he said, really helped him learn how to kind of control his body, which is what he needed to do. He needed to learn how to control the timing of his pitches a little bit better.
Yeah.
He goes out to AA, does great. AAA was not as stellar. His walk rate climbed up a little bit, but Mike Elias really liked what he saw from him, brought him back this year on another minor league deal. He's an invite to camp again. And, Mike Elias told me, Wandisson was in the conversation last year for a call-up, even though his numbers weren't great in AAA. And now he's even more in the conversation. So I don't necessarily expect him to break camp. I think he's going to be a guy like Yanier Cano, who was kind of unexpected, got cut very early in the season, and then went on to be an all-star. So he could be on that trajectory. All it is for him is command.
How many times do we need to learn our lesson about writing guys off too early in camp? Because like you said, I mean, Bautista, all the talk was, he's got great stuff. Can he command it?
Yeah.
And when he was added to the 40-man roster and protected in the Rule 5 draft, he thought, okay, maybe he'll make the team or get called up at some point, turns into an all-star. Yanier Cano, he had a chance to pitch with the Orioles in the big leagues after he was traded over in 2022, and he did not pitch very well. And it was, again, he needed to work on his command.
Right.
Gets it figured out, and he's an all-star last year. So maybe Wandisson Charles is that next guy. It's pretty remarkable for the Orioles to have done it successfully with Bautista and Cano.
Yeah.
They clearly have found some kind of formula. It would be all the more impressive if they could do it 3 times in a row. It's incredibly difficult, but at some point the Orioles are going to need some bullpen depth because injuries are going to happen over the course of the season, and especially after they traded away, one of their hard throwing relievers in DL Hall, maybe there's room for Wandisson Charles at some point.
Yeah, and Wandisson was telling me his first bullpen sessions have gone really well. And of course, it's not the same as game action. I mean, spring training games aren't even the same as real game action, but he said 17 of his 21 pitches were strikes. They don't even care about numbers besides that right now. That is all he's focusing on, is just throwing more strikes. If he throws enough strikes, he's going to be in the big leagues this year.
Yeah, that's awesome. Another guy that could be in the big leagues at some point during the season and maybe on the open roster, that would be Jackson Holliday. We got to see him take some live BP at bats today. He faced some guys who were probably on the fringes of the major league roster, faced lefty Nick Vespi at one point. So not facing a hard thrower, but going lefty on lefty. Interesting matchup and a tough matchup for Jackson Holliday because Vespi has some off speed that can keep hitters guessing. Not great results at the plate. Like you said, it's not regular great game action. Even in a spring training game, the Orioles won't all be looking at, whether did it fall for a hit or not. They'll be looking at how he competes in each at bat. He had a pop fly to left center field. He had a walk. We always know that his plate discipline is well advanced beyond his years. So a little bit of, hit and miss today, and I believe 4 or 5 at bats. But Mike Elias was sitting behind home plate, getting a close look at Jackson Holliday, and they continue to say he's impressive. He's just 20 years old, but he has a chance to make this opening day roster.
And I still believe he has a chance. I still, at this point, 5 days into camp, stand by my belief that I think he probably will go down to start the year and then come up shortly after the season starts. But I think a lot of that will depend on how he looks in game action. But it was a live BP. You can report the results all you want, but they really don't mean anything. Pitchers are a little bit ahead of hitters right now at this point. But just the way he carries himself. Everybody talks about it, but this guy is 20 years old.
It's insane.
And you want to know it. Talking to him, watching him interact with his teammates, the way he carries himself on the field, his discipline. It's just incredible. Whenever he does get called up, he's going to be fully ready to go.
He interacts in the clubhouse like he is a seasoned veteran in a lot of ways. And, I think we saw last year when Grayson Rodriguez had the inside track for a breaking camp with the team, and then he got sent back down to AAA. We saw how he reacted to that. And I think that, his ability to bounce back from that and come back up and, the back half of the 2023 season, how he pitched, down the stretch showed a lot about his maturity level. And I think if Jackson Holliday doesn't make this team out of camp, how he reacts to that, how he responds to being sent back down to AAA will say a lot about his maturity level.
And I don't even think there's any question about his maturity level. I think he is mature. I asked Brendan Hyde this on the first day. I was like, when you look at Jackson Holliday and you talk with him, is he a 20-year-old guy? And Brendan gave the very fair answer of, I don't know what a 20-year-old guy is supposed to act like, but he did say, he routinely forgets how young he is. And
he can't drink.
He doesn't feel like a 20-year-old to him. He feels like just any of his other players, a veteran that he's worked with for years. So that says a lot about where he's at.
But there are so many guys right now in camp, and so the competition is certainly wide open. I think Jordan Westberg, is going to have a say in making this big league roster. He gives the Orioles a lot of infield depth there as well. It's an exciting group of young players, and when you walk through the clubhouse, even more than in previous years, you're just surrounded by some of the best young rising stars in the game. Seeing Adley and Gunnar and Jackson Holliday all in the clubhouse together, along with Colton Cowser. It's a new video on at All Banner Sports on social media, on Twitter and on TikTok and on YouTube.
Why don't you pump the video?
Sure, I will. I'll pump my own tires here. Adley, Gunnar, Colton Cowser, Ryan Mountcastle, and Kyle Stowers are all staying in a house together with some wives. So it's not just a total frat house, but they've been playing Settlers of Catan every night, which is a great game. can attest. I got some tips from Colton Cowser, although he hadn't won a game as of a couple days ago. So maybe I should disregard those. But it's awesome to see the way that these young players have bonded so quickly. And we heard about it because we knew that they were coming up through the minor leagues together. You know, they were teammates in Bowie and in Norfolk before they came to Baltimore. But, you know, you have a bunch of guys right now that are right on the cusp, some on the cusp of stardom, and some that are, you know, maybe on the fringes of the roster. You know, Kyle Stowers and Colton Cowser, both left-handed hitting outfielders. They're competing with Heston Kjerstad. They're competing with Ryan McKenna to make this big league team. And it just goes to show how the Orioles have this glut of talent, but not everybody is going to make this roster squeeze.
I mean, and look, back to them being super close. This is my third baseball market, and I have never seen a clubhouse actually like each other as much as this clubhouse does. And it helps that they're all really good at baseball, and the team is really good, which always makes things better. But like, even during spring training, when everybody's happy, this clubhouse is happier than any clubhouse I've ever seen.
Yes, and no, it's a great group. In terms of, you know, when national reporters have come through, they say it's crazy that all of these position players reported days before they had to. You know, the position players didn't have to report until today, and yet they were there on February 14th when pitchers and catchers were reporting.
Colton told me he was already there for 2 weeks. Yeah, so these players have been here for a while.
Yeah, it just goes to show how eager they are about getting here, how excited they are. You know, it's not every clubhouse that position players, you know, show up this early and are already getting batting practice in the backfields before they actually have to be here. So, you know, as they get older, as they get more seasoned and they've been around a few more spring trainings,
and a little more injury prone and worn down. Let's just be real. It's going to happen.
Yeah. And they all start to have families and stuff. It'll probably be sparser attendance, but for right now, it's awesome to see all these guys come up together and really grow up together. Brandon Hyde was asked about it, and he said the same thing. It's weird that all these guys are getting married and having babies now because you know, it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about them in AAA. So exciting stuff here at Orioles spring training. Plenty more to come. As I said, games are just a few days away, so we're going to get some look at these guys in live action going up against other teams. And it's always a classic spring training thing, but always fun to watch, you know, the matchups. Corbin Burnes against Adley Rutschman, something that we'll never see during the course of the regular season, but it's like best against best. And for the Orioles to have, you know, several, you know, past all-stars on this team going up against each other just goes to show how much heightened the level of competition here is in camp.
It is. And I mean, I think pretty much every spot aside from catcher has competition right now.
Yeah.
And it's not just like, oh, it could be this NRI guy versus this NRI guy.
Right, Rule 5 pick.
Because we just need to fill our roster. It's guys who could be on a major league team and pretty much any other market are fighting for very minimal spots here.
Yeah. I mean, Colton Cowser might not make this team as an outfielder. He's the 14th ranked prospect in baseball, according to MLB Pipeline. You know, Heston Kjerstad, another top 100 prospect who's fighting for a roster spot.
And I don't think there's room for both of them on a team, which is crazy.
Yeah. It is pretty wild to think about the level of prospects here in camp. But all very exciting stuff. As we get closer to opening day, of course, we'll have much more coverage about the training camp battles, the roster battles. And be sure to follow Danielle at @D_Allentuck on Twitter. And at AF Casca for Andy, and follow all the great work that those two are doing on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months. So much more great spring training coverage yet to come from Sarasota. Thanks so much for tuning in live. We really appreciate it. For Danielle Allentuck,